All right, I think we are live. So welcome to everyone that has joined the Mapping the Mind conference today. Thanks for being with us this late in the day. This panel is going to be on social challenges in the psychedelic movement. And I think it might just be, not to toot our own horns too much, but it might just be one of the best panels of the day. So before I get into introducing all the wonderful people I have here with me today, we'll just say a bit about the conference itself. If you are just joining us now, Mapping the Mind is an annual psychedelic science conference that aims to raise funds and awareness in support of psychedelic research. This year, proceeds from Mapping the Mind 2020 are being donated to our friends at MAPS Canada and will help fund a study on psychedelic therapy for eating disorders. Eating disorders are among the most challenging mental disorders to treat. Furthermore, mortality rates for anorexia nervosa are the highest of any psychiatric disorder. Traditional treatments for eating disorders are relatively ineffective, and there is growing evidence that psychedelic therapy could be effective in treating. Dr. Adele LaFrance will look at the potential of MDMA assisted psychotherapy to treat anorexia nervosa and bulimia. And it will take place in 3 locations, 2 in Canada, Toronto and Vancouver, and 1 in the USA, being Denver. Conference goers are able to donate directly to support this study through Crowdcast using the donate button near the bottom of your screen. So the way we're going to frame this panel is I have 3 questions for our wonderful panelists. So we'll be going through those. Each panelist will have roughly 5 minutes to speak on each topic. And then at the end, we should have about 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience, because I know you'll have a bunch of great questions for all of our panelists. So without further delay, we'll jump right into who is here with me today. As for myself, my name is Ivy Zmuda. I am the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Tantalus Labs, a producer of cannabis in BC's Lower Mainland, and also obviously have a bit of an interest in psychedelics. My personal story, which I might touch on later in the panel as we go through some of these questions, are that I came out as transgender just a few months ago in March with the help of psychedelics throughout the year prior. So that's quite enough about me, so we'll get into our panelists. What I'm going to do is read a short bio for them, and then they'll have a few moments to tell us anything they want us to know about themselves. So firstly, we have Dr. Nicole Buchanan. She is a professor of psychology at Michigan State University and clinical director and founder of Alliance Psychological Associates, PLLC, in East Lansing, Michigan. She is a trainee in MAPS MDMA assisted psychotherapy training for communities of color and anticipates offering MDMA assisted psychotherapy when clinical trials are completed. Dr. Buchanan is a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, 4 separate divisions of the American Psychological Association, and has received numerous national and international awards for her research, teaching, clinical work, and professional service. So I will toss it over to Nicole to tell us anything else she wants to know, wants us to know about her.
Hello, everybody. I'm incredibly excited to be here, and it's an honor to be here with this panel of just amazing people in the field. I guess one of the things that I think is important is I'm relatively new to this. So I come to this from a relatively academic stance, but also from a stance of being really outraged from what's happened politically with the trying to criminalize and take away these medications. And as somebody who focuses on trauma, I've been very committed to finding ways of making sure we can use these for healing within marginalized communities.
Wonderful, Nicole. Thanks so much for being here. So next, we will toss it to Bia, Dr. Bia. And Bia, with your last name, what's the correct pronunciation? So I don't mess it. Labate?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we have Dr. Bia Labate with us. She has a PhD in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, Unicamp, Brazil. She is executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, and also a public education and culture specialist at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which we know as MAPS. And also adjunct faculty at the East-West Psychology Program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS. She is an author, co-author, and co-editor of 21 books, 2 special edition journals, and several peer-reviewed articles. So over to Bia.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Antonio. I learned that Antonio is from Spain, so he's an immigrant like me, and I thought that was nice to support his project. He's living in Canada and doing this amazing conference. So much love from San Francisco Bay Area. We're having some blue skies despite a lot of crazy fires. Today is a nice day. I feel a lot of gratitude for my fellow Californians that helped me migrate from the closet to being open and out and queer and proud. And I'm very, very happy to be in the center, the epicenter of the vibrant Bay Area where the psychedelic revolution is happening and taking over the whole world. Not to despise anybody's land, but here is really where we're really spearheading a lot of that. I want to talk about all these topics that are dear to my heart. Chacruna, so happy to see Alex and Nicole here that are part of our team, and we're trying to create access, inclusion, diversity, equity, reciprocity. That's at the core of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bia, and thanks for being here. So up next, we have Dr. Alexander Belser. Alex is a psychedelic researcher and licensed psychologist at Yale University. He is the founding president of Nautilus Sanctuary, the first nonprofit center for psychedelic medicine on the East Coast. He is also a member of Chacruna Institute's Women, Gender Diversity, and Sexual Minorities Working Group, where he works on issues impacting LGBTQI+ people. For the last 20 years, Alex has been active in the psychedelic research community and has authored over a dozen peer-reviewed journal articles and chapters. At Yale, Alex is investigating psilocybin treatments for OCD and depression, and also serves as a psychologist on the MAP-sponsored trials of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. He is also the chief clinical officer of Delia, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Alex, Therapeutics, a drug discovery platform for the development of proprietary tryptamine-based therapeutics. And his research has been featured on the front page of the New York Times, in the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the Guardian, Vice, and in Michael Pollan's book, which I think a lot of us are big fans of, How to Change Your Mind. So over to you, Alex.
Well, some of us are big fans, but we also have some very good critiques to wage. I want to thank you, Ivy, for the intro. And I'm really excited that these accessibility, equitability, diversity, social challenges, as I think the title of this panel is happening, that these sorts of talks are happening on the roster at psychedelic conferences. As Bia and others know, they were not happening on the roster at psychedelic conferences as short a time ago as a few years ago in past psychedelic science conferences. And many of us waged and lobbied for a discourse on exactly these topics that I think you'll be asking us about, Ivy. And while those conversations were happening at the margins, they were not happening on center stage. And I'm really glad that Mapping the Mind has decided to include this sort of programming.
As am I, and I'm sure as are we all. Thanks so much, Alex. So, last but certainly not least is Dr. Will Su, MD. He has completed medical and graduate school at UCLA and the University of Oxford, respectively, before training as a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School. He remained on the faculty at Harvard for 2 years prior to moving to New York City to further pursue his interest in psychedelic medicine as a practitioner and public advocate through speaking, writing, and social media. Dr. Su has been trained by MAPS to provide MDMA-assisted therapy and also maintains a private practice in sunny Los Angeles where he provides individual psychotherapy and ketamine-facilitated psychotherapy. So over to you, Will.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I guess the thing to add to that to me is just I'm very passionate about, educating everyone on how to best use psychedelics to do healing work. And as a medical doctor, I know that there's, I think there's an appearance that psychedelics are potentially only going to unfold or may mainly unfold within only the medicalized community. And, I think it's important, and I think that, that these are medicines that should be available to everybody. I do believe that non-medically trained people can also help heal themselves and help, heal their peer groups also. So to me, I'm just really passionate about everyone having the education and access to these medicines.
Wonderful, thanks, Will. And just on a personal note, like that is my biggest concern now, is that working with these medicines will kind of be gatekept beyond the medical community. Not that there is anything wrong with that community, but that I really do think all walks of life should be able to contribute something if they have something to contribute. So I'm very, very happy to hear you say that. So without further ado, we will jump right into our questions. So the way I will kind of run this is each panelist will have about 5 minutes to speak on the topic, and then I will throw it to the next panelist. We'll change up the order a little bit based on the questions, due to the fact that we have some wonderful people here with different areas of expertise. So question number 1, the trauma inflicted by racism across society has been pushed to the forefront of public consciousness by recent events. How can psychedelics help communities facing oppression? And I would like to toss this one first to Nicole.
Thank you. I suspected I might be able to talk about this for a few minutes. So one, I think we need to go back to the core principle around psychedelics is around radical healing. And these are communities that have been ravaged by historical trauma, contemporary trauma, the intergenerational trauma. And one of the powerful things with psychedelics is that it can help do some of that healing, even when you don't have access to the words and the direct memory of what has caused the suffering. And so being able to ensure that psychedelics are available, and I love the point that we made, and it cannot solely be that it's available through medicalized systems, because that is not one, there is a history, a long legacy of ways in which psychedelic studies, but also the medical community has used Black and brown bodies to do harm. So if we only allow this type of healing through these medicalized centers, that still means we're in essence saying these communities don't belong and they won't get the kind of healing that they so desperately deserve. So if part of the importance of psychedelics in healing these communities is that, one, it originated with these communities by and large, then was criminalized and taken away often from many of these communities. So there's a huge debt to be paid, and the amount of trauma that these communities have experienced, if we're going based on who has the largest needs, making sure those are met first, then these communities should be the first in line. But I don't think our current system is going to allow us to get there. I was part of MAP's first cohort of people of color being trained to be MDMA assisted psychotherapists. So there are approximately 40 of us. And as far as I know, there has not been another cohort like it. And any given cohort has not been terribly diverse. And it makes a difference whether or not the person leading you on these kind of journeys shares your lived experiences, understands your history or not, whether it's from your ability to establish trust, but also the kinds of things that happen within a psychedelic assisted session, where Monica Williams and colleagues have an article that's coming out. In fact, it's already available online with the Journal of Psychedelic Studies, where they talk about the experiences 3 Black women had going through a guided session through the MDMA assisted psychotherapy program. And in this session, they experienced microaggressions and the content that had this very nuanced component around race and gender intersecting was missed by the clinicians. And this to me is one of the things that is really problematic, but when we don't have enough people trained from within the community to offer these services to people of the community. So I think psychedelics, part of why I so believe in this is because I felt the radical healing power that they offer. And these communities deserve it. And they deserve to have it from people that understand the community and understand them and come from the community. I'm sure that's 5 minutes also.
No, right on, almost perfect. Thanks so much on that, Nicole. I am definitely there with you on, what we're seeing focused on versus what we're not seeing focused on. So very, very happy you are in this fight with us. So next, I would like to give it to Will.
All right, thank you. I don't know. I guess what's coming to mind right now is how, I guess when you say the question, how can psychedelics help heal the communities facing oppression? I think I don't know, the terms trauma versus what is traumatic comes to mind. Trauma being the initial, incident that if left uncatharsis, ends up leading to traumatic feelings later, even in the absence of the initial trauma. And so, when I think of my own healing or the healing of my clients, it's rarely done in the form of like directly with, if you want to use the word perpetrator, right, or as opposed to the victim. And so, I think one area is to really, give more access, and provide training, as Nicole was saying, to all communities who are, interested in becoming healers, so that, more likely they're going to go back to their communities to do this work. I think then you have, perhaps then you need the support of the different organizations that are doing the training to allow and to recruit people and to support that, like MAPS and Hefter, etc. So those are the kind of the two, more easier things I think that come to mind for me. But then I actually, there some thoughts come to mind around, can you then have, say two groups, and right now when we say racism in the country, what comes to mind for me it's not just racism. Most of what's coming up right now is Black Americans and white Americans, right? We're not discussing or seeing much in the mainstream about Asian Americans or Chinese Americans. And this term people of color, I often, it doesn't resonate very strongly with me because it puts in a bucket a large number of people who have not had a voice in the last few months, even during the BLM movement. And I know in particular Chinese Americans, I'm half Chinese, have felt very silenced during these last few months. So the reason I bring that up is that, I think that at some level, the communities themselves, I think it's important for them to hopefully gain interest and to, again, seek training to become therapists. I think there's another level of work to be able to bring the education and what these medicines are about to the communities themselves, and we have education to show that these are, very, very helpful tools for healing, because I do think that there's nuances in how each of those communities may accept because of stigmas within their own cultures. Those are the different things that come to mind for me.
Wonderful, thank you all really great points. So next, I will toss it to Via and her dog as well. If your dog wants to mention anything, feel free.
I'm sorry, people. This is a coronavirus office. So yeah, thanks for that question. I think if we look historically and traditionally, Indigenous people have survived colonization a lot through using psychedelics and doing rituals. And traditionally, psychedelics have been at the center of many civilizations and at the core on how people organize society. So it's extremely related to socialization, to territory, to identity, to ethnicity alliances between different cultures, but also to war. In some, if you look at the colonization of the Americas, a lot of the resistance, a lot of the resilience has to do with local forms of organization and spirituality and ritual and community. And at the core of a lot of those is the use of psychedelics. And even, it's a large pharmacopoeia that doesn't include only psychedelics, but a series of plants. Perhaps tobacco is the most important plant medicine of the Americas that has received very little attention. But by praying and being in ceremony, indigenous people have managed to stay indigenous despite years and years of oppression, genocide, attack, and they continue to do so. And, they're generous enough to invite us in when we need our own healing. Despite being persecuted for centuries, these medicines from indigenous people are now with us, and we're having a chance to learn directly from the source. So I just wanted to say that traditionally, psychedelics are at the center of civilizations and at the center of social organization. So it has been extremely related to resistance. Then, we can bring it more to the contemporary America's field. I made a few notes. You tell me when to stop. Please control my time. So we should first start by asking people of color how it feels to be oppressed, not assume that we know. So start by asking and learning. And then I'm throwing a bit of random things that it's not very much my style to say therapy things because I am an anthropologist, but I'm trying to be more open. Psychedelics can help you grasp with your inherent worth, which is important for people that suffer trauma. Oppressed people in general don't have access to mental health services. Psychedelics can be a shortcut, can reduce the time, and can help people achieve healing. Psychedelics can open people for spirituality, which can offer existential comfort. Oppression is a form of embodied trauma and also carry intergenerational dimensions, which I learned with Dr. Nicole in this webinar that I posted on the chat. Psychedelics can help heal the trauma of racism. Also, psychedelics can open your mind to other paradigms, to other worlds, to other hopes, to other utopias, to other dreams. And I want to this is my attempt to make a triple quote. Please bear with me. It's by a journal that I published with Dr. Monica Williams, and this researcher Dubois says, an African American, he says that African Americans are apt to develop what he called a double consciousness, in his own words. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always being looked at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's souls by the tape of a world that looks on in an amused contempt and pity. Whenever feels this two-ness, in America, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dodged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. I don't know how to say that. So what I'm trying to say is that people that suffer racism are already kind of trained to have this resilience and this ability to get in and out and to look from the outside into their own identity and to kind of disidentify yourself, the images that have been projected into you. So maybe that, psychedelics can help foster more this ability to do a transit, escape, and a back that allows revisiting all of this. But anyway, to conclude, I want to say this is really not about healing the individual only. And if we're just thinking on how we're healing our biographies, our own traumas, our childhood things, we're really missing the big picture. The big picture is really about healing the collective, and racism is a form of collective trauma. And psychedelics can really help us think about those issues.
Wonderful, Bia. Thanks so much. It's really great that you bring up childhood trauma, because I was at a conference, I was watching a conference yesterday where they talked about the fact that they perhaps think that the reason psilocybin has long-lasting impacts after treatment is because it can perhaps downregulate genes for inflammation. And that's just a theory right now, but what they have found proof for is that childhood trauma can actually lead to physical repercussions later in life, like heart disease, diabetes, all that kind of thing. So yeah, I am all in with you that psychedelics are a very, very cool way of perhaps doing some new treatment methods in the future. So Alex, the last person on this topic, I will throw it to you.
I want to ask the question of how psychedelics are misused in propagating structural racism in the United States and around the world. And one way is this pernicious, nuanced type of psychedelic exceptionalism. We in the United States live in a country that's the biggest jailer in the world and has been for my entire lifetime, and I'm turning 40 this year. We have more people per capita behind bars than any other nation, including China and Syria and other places that you think might have more, and more in total, over, I think, 7 million people under criminal justice supervision, vastly disproportionately Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer folks. The system, we know, largely stems from the war on drugs, which historically we have evidence from Nixon and down the line that it was an intentional war perpetrated to keep people of color in line, disempowered, along with radicals like hippies. And so many, I have a master's degree in criminology, and when you look at the studies on like who's arrested, what's involved, more than half of arrests involve some sort of either drug-related crime or a person who's intoxicated in some way. And so this massive, terrifying racial injustice experience, not just with ICE camps in the last few years, but in your local county jails and state facilities and Bureau of Prison facilities on the federal level, propagates systemic racism to a terrible extent. And then we have the psychedelic line of research with, largely white cisgender men in ties and coats going out for massive venture capital backed NASDAQ releases, making a lot of money on the potential therapeutic value of these medicines. But I think that, as Audre Lorde says, the master's tools cannot be, will never dismantle the master's house. I think I may have said that incorrectly. Using psychedelics through these highly medicalized models that perpetrates corporate ownership, that perpetuates a type of scientific reductivism that completely ignores the issue of race in the room and the litany of racial abuses, not just with MK Ultra, but in other complex ways, including the death of Elijah McClain in racist policing practices. This is a young Black man who's 23 years old who was diagnosed with excited delirium, which is a pseudoscience. It's not an actual diagnosis that the APA or the AMA have endorsed. He was given 500 milligrams of ketamine, which is a profoundly, in some ways, beautiful medicine that I think can be very healing for many people. At the behest, he was given this injection of ketamine at the behest of white police officers in Aurora, Colorado, and he subsequently died a few days later. This way in which paramedics are getting pressure from white police officers to inject a Black man with psychedelics at a dosage range that far exceeds any normal dosage protocol is an example of so many things that we would say were going wrong, but this is how the system works. And so the only thing that I'll say about that is that I've taken inspiration from learning from others and other people's examples. We recently released a statement, a professional statement on the death of Elijah McClain and the misuse of ketamine that has over 150 professional signatories. And a number of other associations have come out speaking against these racing police practices. And Aurora, Colorado, the county where this has been going on, where they're using ketamine all the time in paramedic stops for people who are agitated, they've decided to stop using ketamine for the time being. They've actually ceased that policy and have put it on hold and are now reviewing it. It's not the big fix that we need, but I think it's a sign that reform can be held at the margins, and that we can sit in the middle with a more radical, like complete dismantling approach to the American criminal justice system, which it really, I don't think, can be reformed in the way that it's currently established.
Wonderful, Alex. Yeah, those are all really great points, and like I don't think we should ever put anyone in the position of having that power over people who are in that big of a distress situation. I mean, I think what we've seen in Canada with the police handling wellness checks with some really bad consequences over the past 2 or 3 months really speak to what you just said. So on to question number 2. My own experience with psychedelics and gender identity raises an interesting question as to the potential for psychedelics research and therapy within the LGBTQI+ community. And briefly, that experience was not that psychedelics told me one day out of nowhere I was transgender, but reframed it and helped me to realize it's better to live as who you are versus who you're not, if I can put that into a soundbite. So how do our panelists see this area of research and practice unfolding? And given that is his area of expertise, I will toss this to Alex.
Oh wow! I get the front and back bookends. It feels a little hard. I'm in my own process of kind of coming out of. I've been out for 20 years as a queer man, and exploring my own gender in different ways. And I wonder of the 278 people in this chat right now, how they're sitting, and what your experiences are of your sexual identity, your gender experience, sitting here as you're looking at the screen, watching us, talk and think. But also in your psychedelic visionary experiences, of which I'm sure many of you have had. As a psychologist, as a therapist, I get to work with people who come into treatment with all sorts of embedded transphobic, homophobic experiences, both straight and queer, cisgender and non-binary, all manner of things. And it's amazing how psychedelic experiences, including MDMA, open and shift and disinter these internalized structures of self-hate, especially for queer folks, that were put there through years and messages of being inferior, shameful, and stigmatized. I can't tell you how many friends I have here in Brooklyn that I listen to their stories of going home and feeling really rejected profoundly from their families. And my dissertation research was about preventing suicide amongst gay and lesbian kids, adolescents, because so many of them were at huge rates for violence in their communities, in their homes, in their places of worship and schools. And then it's no wonder that they suffer profoundly higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, and other difficulties later in life. The psychedelic community does not get to wear the white hat here. In fact, the psychedelic community, from before I got to be involved, led largely by white cisgender straight men, including people like Timothy Leary, who said explicitly, LSD is a specific cure for homosexuality. He thought that we could use LSD. We still talk about him like the Pied Prophet of psychedelics, with a little bit of like, he went too far. This is a guy who said, in print, we can cure all these gay people of this terrible affliction, homosexuality, and we can do it using this magic new chemical. Same thing with Ram Dass, who published multiple case reports of treating Richard Alpert, his colleague at Harvard, treating sexual minority and gender minority people through conversion therapy, which has been outlawed in many states to convert queer people to become straight, to rid them of this affliction. Masters in Houston used peyote and what they said was that it led towards heterosexualization, a word so strange it's hard to even pronounce. The famous Hollywood Hospital in British Columbia treated many people, including many sexual minority people. Now, this is more than a few decades in the past, but even today, It is normative when a person walks into a room for them to have the expectation in psychedelic treatment that they will have a cisgender male therapist and a cisgender female therapist. This reprises gender essentialism in its worst and most pernicious form. The idea that you have to have a mommy and daddy in the room, that they have to be cisgender male and female, and that the man embodies some sort of stereotyped essentialized masculinity, and the woman embodies some sorts of stereotyped traditional ideals of femininity, and that you need those individuals in order to create a healing set and setting context. I would argue that this does injustice and pernicious harm to straight folks, as well as sexual minority people, because we're not even aware, I think many people are not aware or have not had discourses, how that sort of stereotype sexual dyadism, that literal binary in the room, propagates a sort of internalized sense of homophobia and transphobia. And this is the standard practice today. It's only recently that we've even started to ask the question, what are your pronouns? What is your sexual identity? What is your gender identity? We started to put those questions into our research studies, but we still don't know if these treatments work as well or differently for queer folks as they do for heterosexual folks. So there's a lot to be said on this. I think that there's a lot of room for allyship amongst target groups, racial, ethnic minorities, indigenous folks, queer folks. There's a lot of racism in the queer communities that we need to work on and are working on. And it's something that I have been sitting with. So there's allyship opportunities here, and I think there's a long way for us to go.
Wonderful, Alex. Yeah, I am definitely on the same page with all of that, and like with trans people in particular. Like I think the challenges that some of us go through to access medical care, even like basic medical care, never mind HRT, can really put us in some of those boxes you've mentioned. And like we have it good here in Canada. I have it really, really good in BC and elsewhere in the world. I think we take what we have for granted here. So next, I will throw it to Dia.
It's an honor to speak after Alex. I think it was in 2010 that I saw him and an American woman hanging some little like sheets saying, gay-friendly meetup, psychedelic science. And I thought at the time, I looked at and I said, wow, Americans are so weird. What is this? Are they going to go and say, hi, I like LSD, I'm gay. Hi, I like masculine, and I'm bisexual. And I was really like ridiculing it. And I can say that 10 years later, I'm married to that woman. And we hosted that conference called Queer in Psychedelics. So it was a bit ironic. I want to say that psychedelics didn't really heal my internal homophobia and my hatred and myself, diminishing. What really healed me was California. And that was migrating here. It was a true liberation for myself. And I finally decided to do what Americans call get out of the closet. And because I'm such a nerd and I like conferences, I decided to celebrate coming out by inventing a conference called Queer in Psychedelics. I was still having a hard time naming my wife in the conference. And I was like, okay, it's enough. But you don't have to appear there. And it's been a long journey, and we've been together 10 years, and we put that at the center of our mission in Chacruna. So we hosted Queer in Psychedelics. Alex was our star presenter. I have put there the call for action that he has presented. I really recommend, I think that's the Bible of everything, this that I pasted on the chat. And since we hosted that conference, we have seen a big impact. We have seen, we also have a queer session in our site, and we saw a lot of, I saw at least 5 queering circles, integration circles emerge, emerge articles all over in different press, popular media, people are writing about it. So it's really a work that we have to do, and it's in the making. And we're historical eyewitnesses of the need to do this. So we really need to keep on pushing to raise activism for greater representation of queer people in the field. And we need to also create the safe spaces that can, support people coming to terms with their sexual and gender identity. It's up to us to keep on commenting. So Clancy, my wife, she has written about her PhDs about how gays and lesbians come to terms with their identity through drinking ayahuasca. And so we have to keep on doing research like that. And as Alex said, we have to keep on studying, documenting, and researching the dark history of psychedelics being used as conversion therapy tools, which is still pretty fresh and pretty unacknowledged. And I'm going to repeat a lot of things that he says, which is the importance to just collect data regarding gender and sexuality when we do research. I think this is even running behind from people of color, because people will try to assess for race, but hardly ever assess, data in your conferences, in your researches, in your institution for sexuality and gender. And so the other thing that we have to do that is ugly and it stinks is we really have to denounce homophobia in our field, and especially in ayahuasca circles. And so we also have a whole thing in Chacruna that we created some guidelines to raise awareness around sexual abuse, and this kind of things go together, like people that are doing abuse and are homophobic, and it's just all this legacy that we have from this patriarchal systems. I have gotten into a series of really bad conflicts, but I kind of freed myself by immigrating here. I don't care to lose some ties and to break some friendships, because I just become unacceptable for me. Homophobia, there's still groups in Brazil that claim to give ayahuasca to change people's sexual orientation. The União do Vegetal is the main Brazilian ayahuasca church. They have a statement published claiming that they heal sexual orientation and other imperfections. So we really have to keep on pushing that. And as Alex said, the male and female diet is some topic we have to work on. And also a lot from his own manifest, assess sexual orientation and gender identity in all psychedelic studies, run subgroup analysis to evaluate treatment response for sexual minority people, run meta-analysis across studies to aggregate data for LGBTQ populations, create new affirmative therapies by, with, and for LGBTQ people, research sex and sexuality. We just had another crowdcast event of Community Forum in Chacruna with a pioneer in the Deadhead, and he was telling us how originally the hippie movements and the Deadheads were also homophobic, and there's so much areas that we take for granted and we don't study. We just have to keep on investigating all of them and advancing awareness and research.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pia. I will toss it next to Nicole.
Yeah, I feel like so many wonderful things have already been said, and I completely agree with the pieces here. One of the things that, linking to where a lot of my work comes to, is this idea of thinking also about the intersecting identities and thinking about what is it that happens specifically to Black trans women, Black trans men, and the level of violence, the level of rejection and harm, and I just really experiences that are hard to wrap your head around. And so being able to use these substances to help bring healing to whatever extent for these kinds of things is immense. But I'd also, taking a slightly different direction, I would love to see more done in how these bring healing to the perpetrators of homophobia, those individuals who, for some reason, are so committed to hate of another person who they don't even know. Part of me just fundamentally cannot understand where that comes from, but I feel like it must come from a space that is in so dire need of healing, potentially also laden with self-hate. But part of the power of psychedelics is that ability to feel love across difference, and to begin to see how others, no matter kind of how they're packaged, are very, very similar to you. And to have that love and compassion for others that you want to have for yourself. So being able to use these medicines for healing within our marginalized communities, but also turning it back on those who have dominant identities and put the expectation that you are going to use these also to bring yourself to a point where you're no longer acting as perpetrator.
Wonderful, Nicole. Yeah, like I think what we might not think about sometimes is the perpetrators, and as much as maybe on the scale of cosmic justice, their feelings shouldn't matter all that much. In the reality we live in, they do. And when you can turn enemy into a friend, I mean, you are only doing good. So.
But if I could say one other piece of that, when I say perpetrator, I think many of us think of the ones that perhaps are actively inflicting violence, but we need to also remember that our silence is perpetration, that are kind of not questioning the gender binary, making assumptions about who can be what is an act of perpetration. And when we begin to think about it in a more broad way, it really comes down to we're all responsible for the way our society has marginalized various groups. And so we all need to take responsibility in doing our own work to heal, as well as systemic level healing, because the individual isn't going to get us there.
Exactly.
We need to look at our institutions and our systems that allow this kind of perpetuation.
Exactly. Wonderful. Thank you. And now on this topic, I'll toss it to Will.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, really, I'm glad that Nicole mentioned the perpetrators. So actually, first I apologize because I was a little bit scatterbrained when I was answering the first question. So I think my response is going to address both, because I think in both questions we're talking about groups, whether it's a racial minority or gender sexuality, that we're viewing as oppressed or victimized. Because there's a quote that comes to mind that I heard recently, which says that nobody has a monopoly on suffering. And one of the things that I think is very painful to watch is often, I think, in when we feel very strongly, or when a group feels very strongly, there's a lot of an us versus them mentality. And I think, a concept that I've started to think about for my own personal life is that to do work, to evolve each of us individually, or to evolve a group, we have to have enough commonality and we have to have enough difference to do work, right? If we only have commonality, we're only preaching to the choir. If we only have difference, we're only fighting. And so in some of those situations, if we're just fighting, I think we just say we walk away. Like, I cannot make a difference here. But again, if we're just in our own circle and we're just agreeing on everything, that also doesn't do anything. And so, I think in many ways, another way to say it is that I think we are each victims and we are each perpetrators of different aspects. And I think that's what makes this so complex, right? All of us have some sort of, insecurity or victimhood around physical abuse or race or gender or age or nationality or accent. And so in some ways, I feel it can feel overwhelming saying, I've got to memorize and be aware of all of these different things so that I don't offend anybody. And I feel overwhelmed by this sometimes. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I work with some clients who are very wealthy or who are public figures, and sometimes I'm criticized for that. But I actually think it's really important that everybody receives the medicine, because if there are people who are in positions of power, there usually are people who are in those positions because they've sought power because of some, insecurity within them that made them seek that to begin with. And so I think if we are really, as a community of healers working with medicines, providing it to the community at large, I think that's when we can potentially see the most, evolution of the communities as a whole. So.
Wonderful, Will. Yeah, I really like what you bring up both now and in our pre-talk for the panel. I think we do have to kind of realize that to some people, this can be very overwhelming. And yeah, just wonderful that you brought that up. So that is question number 2 dealt with. We're actually not doing too bad on time, so we'll hop to question number 3 and then some questions from the audience. So number 3 is, many psychedelic preparations and practices began with Indigenous cultures. How should the psychedelics industry respect and acknowledge the originators of the movement? And I just want to mention very, very briefly, I actually had some challenges with the wording of this question, because I think it's important to kind of realize here that we don't have a lot of representation from those communities, perhaps on this panel, and that in regards to what we have previously talked about on this panel, that maybe that's where it starts, that we need to have those voices at the table when we talk about these things. And just some of the trends I've seen with what makes the news, what's popular with people with money, that there's almost like this movement to rebrand taking psychedelics as something that maybe Silicon Valley came up with in the past 5 years as like biohacking. And I think that's a neat concept to like explore, but I really get the feeling sometimes that we're trying, that it's like that old joke that like Uber was like Silicon Valley reinventing taxis, or like the multitude of other things they've kind of tweaked and kind of fit into their model of disruption, when maybe it wasn't really disrupting all that much. But anyway, without further delay on that topic, I will toss it to Pia.
Yeah, thank you. Also thinking that sitting here in Ohlone territory, and there's so many angles, I feel a little like intimidated, because I think Canada has done a lot of work, and this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there's a lot of things that I feel kind of a Canadian Indigenous scholar expert should be more adequate to talk than me. So trying to run different lanes and do the best I can. Also have a few notes. I would start by saying, don't try to patent medicalized Indigenous plant medicines such as ayahuasca or peyote without consultation to Indigenous people. That we shouldn't take for granted that we should make these medicines, and we should talk to the people that are traditional stewards of these plant medicines. And of course, increase Indigenous representation in the field, and this means including Indigenous people in your nonprofits, in your companies, in your publications, in psychedelic conferences. In Chacruna, we also just published this document called Guidelines for Inclusion of Indigenous People in Psychedelic Science Conferences. And basically in Chacruna, we have been trying to give visibility, empower, platform Indigenous people and people of color. In our writings and our conferences and our community forums, we say they are our stars. We sometimes have a token white man, to bring some audience, but our stars are really the people of color. And so this is about inverting a bit the balance that it currently exists in the field, and trying to rewrite the narratives of the historical narratives of psychedelic mainstream, to reinsert people of color, Indigenous people in these narratives. And this is a work that we really want to do. We're currently having 2 series in Chacruna permanently. One is Wednesday, the other is Friday. One is about women and the other is about people of color. So every week we try to give visibility to a different